Hello and welcome back everyone to the second episode of our ABAP on HANA Come as for HANA course. In the previous session we saw what is HANA, why do we need it. We saw some basic features of HANA. Now let's continue in this part. So in this part we are going to start on what is row store versus column store. So let's start and discuss that. Row store versus column store versus column store. So what do you think? What is the meaning of being a row store or column store? So before we jump on to these things, first I will directly give a here note. All our standard table, or let's say most of our standard tables, or better it will be SAP has made most of our standard tables as column oriented in S4 HANA. Most of the columns. Why it is so? So we will see it, but before we need to understand what is the meaning of row store and what is column store. So row store. Most of the traditional databases uses the concept of row store to store the data. What is the meaning of having row store? So let's say if I have some data, let's say for example if I have some data like let's say sales order number, sold to party, material number, amount and currency, and I want to store it in form of a row store. So how it will be stored? Okay, so let's say if I have 6 records and I want to store them, so in form of row store we are going to store it like this way. Sold to party 1, let's say material number 1, some amount, right, and some currency also. Then for the next record, since we are going for row store, it will be stored here also. So 1001, sold to party 2, right, mat number 2, or let's say mat 1, 600 amount and INR. Then going for the next record. Okay, so if space is filled in the row, we will continue from the next row. So 1002, right, sold to party 2, mat 2, some material number, amount and currency. Then I'll go for the next record. So 103, sold to party 2, the next material number 3, next amount and JPY or some other currency, let's say again US dollar. Next record 104, sold to party 3 or sold to party 1, material number, amount, currency, US dollar. Just take a situation or take a hypothetical condition that this guy is going to store data in form of row store. So what are the advantages and disadvantages for it? If we have this data here, let's say 550 INR, if we have this data here in form of row store, they all are stored in the same row, and once our row is getting filled, then we are moving on to the next row. So in this figure we have 6 records. The data is stored in row store format one after another. Now suppose if we want to calculate the total amount, total sales amount, if I have to calculate here total sales amount, if I have to calculate this total sales amount, then how we will calculate that? This is my sales amount, right? This is my amount. So how will I calculate that? I will go to each field one by one. From one, I will go to this sales order, sold to party, material, then I will get my amount. So first amount I got, then I will go for next, 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 then I got next amount. Because all of them are stored in row format, we cannot predict where is my amount, where is my amount, right? So we will have to go, so to calculate each sales here we'll have to scan each field, and then we are going to perform the calculation of sales amount, right? So even if in case of array store, what we see, if we want to perform operation on certain columns, then we will have to visit or scan all the fields even if they are not of our use. And because of this, operations of row store becomes costly and more time consuming. Operations of row store becomes costly and more time consuming. Now let's take the hypothetical condition for our column store. Okay, column store, column store. Now let's store the same data in form of column store and see what is going to happen. So one row at a time. So first, second, third, third, fourth, fourth, fifth, and sixth, right? Same. They are stored in column store format. One column at a time. This is my sales order number, this is my sold to party one, this is my material number, this is my amount, and this is my currency. So now if I have to perform the total amount again on this one, we will simply go to the fourth columns and we can use the aggregate function directly on this column, right? We can directly use aggregate function to calculate the total amount. So for calculating the total amount, we are only required to use 6 cells here, 6 cells here, 6 cells here, right? But in case of row store, we were forced to visit each cell here. Can you see each and every cell? But even if we don't need it, so what I can say, in case of column store advantages, if we want to perform any operation on the field or on a column, if we want to perform any operation on the field or on the column, then it is very easy for us, for us, as all of them are in the same column, right? Its cost is very less, but if we see the same thing in case of our row store, this will become a disadvantage, right? So disadvantage of row store, here. So in case of row store, if we want to perform operations on a certain column, we will have to visit and scan all the fields, even if they are not they are not of our use. And because of this, operations on row store becomes very costly, right? And it is more time consuming. This is a disadvantage. Now let's say I want to find, let's say uh, in let's say I have another requirement now. Okay, my requirement is I want to perform select star on the table. Select star on the table. Select star simply means that I need all the data on the table. So which store is more beneficial in this situation? Obviously row store, because we have all our data aligned in the same one. I will go, I need this one also, 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 everything I need here, right? So it will become an advantage here in case of row store. It will become advantage here in case of row store. Advantage here in case of row store if we want to perform any operation. So in case of row store, if we want to go for all the records, let's select star from the table, then it will become easier, as all the fields are stored row wise, right? It will become easier as all the fields are stored row wise. But if you talk about column store, I will go there, right? I'll go to first column, I will fetch this, then I will have to go to next column, I will fetch this, then I will have to go for next columns, I will have to go next and next, then I will come back. So it is really time consuming. Now for the second row, I will come here, then I will go for here, then I will come out, then I will go for here, then I will come here. So it's really difficult here, right? It is really difficult. Advantage of we got disadvantage. We have got disadvantages now. So if we want to use select query to get all the records, that is select star from the table, then it will be relatively slower, right? Relatively slower if we compare it with row store, right? As we will have to go to one by one on different columns for each record. Now the question here is how often or how many times you are going to use select star. How often you are going to use select star? If I open any of my standard tables, let's say I'm opening any of my standard tables, I'm going for it, and I'm opening any of my standard tables here. Let's say I'm opening EKKO. How many columns are here? 228. How many times you guys have used select star? How many times you have used all these columns in any project? Never. Most of the times you are only required to use 10 to 15 columns from a table. Then why we need it? Why we need all these columns? Why do we need to load all these columns? Why we need to perform select star? Right? So mostly I'm not saying which is more beneficial, but I am saying if I am comparing row store and column store, which one I am going to use more? That is why SAP has made most of the standard tables as column oriented. So now if you go and check the technical setting, DB specific properties, you will find that SAP has made it column store, right? SAP has made it column store. So the question here is, which store is more beneficial? Which store is more beneficial? Which store is more beneficial? Let's see them one by one in detail. So in most of the cases, we do not require, okay, we do not require to use select star. We do not require to use select star. So it is always advisable to use column store database. Okay. Now the column store is more faster in, the column store is much faster in, it is much faster in reading data, aggregate functions. No need to create secondary indexes now, right? Earlier creating secondary index is also a problem because it is taking some space on the database layer. So now we no need to create secondary indexes. We can use columns as a secondary index here. We can use directly columns as the secondary index here. Okay, it saves memory, right? Also, since computers process, if we talk about computers, can process number way faster, and in our practical part we play with numbers because everything is a computation. So 90% operations are mainly based on numbers, so we can play with numbers more often. That is why column store is more efficient, and mostly we play with numbers, right? Real-time data processing, we play with numbers. That is why column store is more efficient if we compare. So like we can say that we use 70% mostly columns, 70% operations are mostly column based and 30% are only row based. So you can clearly see the advantage where we are going to get more efficient result, right? Also in case of column store we get massive parallel processing. In case of column store we usually get massive parallel processing, right? So what SAP did with SAP HANA coming into the picture, SAP chose optimized column store concept. Okay, now you can understand why we are using column store here, making HANA as fastest and most efficient among all the database for real-time data processing, right? So if you go to any of the standard table, mostly you are going to find the same thing. Column store. Now the question here is, they are for standard tables. That's good. Now as a developer, when I'm creating it, which table we are going to choose? So when to choose row store and when to choose column store? As a developer, what will be my approach here, right? Standard tables are good. Now I understand why we need row or whatever it is. Okay, so for custom table we need to define it, right? So what I will do here is I'm going to take few points for when to choose row store, when we are going for row store, and then when we will go for column store. So if there is a table if there is the table in which read is less frequently used, that is we are not reading the, mostly we are not reading the data, but update is used often, then we will go for row store. Okay, because column stores are mostly read optimized. If data is very less, then we don't need any concept, we can directly go for row concept, right? If we want to use select star, then we can go for this concept also, right? And also if you have large number of unique values, unique values, if you have large number of unique values, then the compression will not be there, because the compression is more if we have more repeated and duplicate values, then we should use row store, right? If we have large number of unique values, then compression will not be that big. In that situation, what we can do, we can use the concept of row store. Then column store. So column store, let's go and check that. Column store is, if we check the 70% ERP operation, 70% ERP operations in database are read operation. If you create any table, how often you update the data? If you check, you mostly perform, you are going to bring the data mostly. So 75% of ERP operations in database are read operations, right? And we know row store is read optimized, because on a particular column it is really column store is read optimized, and on a particular column it's really easy for us to perform all these operations, right? So if we have most read operations, and then we will go for column, right? Then second, when we want only few columns in real life, then we want to aggregate data, then we will go for column store table, right? Then if there is large number of duplicate values, if there is large number of duplicate values, then in that situation compression will be very high, right? Will be very high. Then if data volume is low, okay, and then these are some of the features that if you have in your table, then you should go for column store. Mostly if you check 70%, mostly column operations are more beneficial. That is why all our standard tables are column oriented, okay? Now in case of our ERP system, most of the tables have a lot of duplicate values. That is why when we use the column store in HANA, as compression will be higher and system will have a good compression in this situation, right? So for good compression, that is why SAP has used column store, because if you check all other columns except the primary keys, most of them you will find only duplicate data. So we will have a very high compression in case of our HANA database, okay? Also, with one important note here, the note is, we have one important note here. In case of HANA, there is no concept of pooled table and cluster table. There is no concept of pool table and cluster table. That concept has been deprecated. In case of HANA, we are only going to create transparent tables. We are only going to create transparent table, right? Okay, so this is all for our row store concept. So from the next part we will see how does the presence, how does it affect when HANA came into the picture, how life of an ABAP developer changes, how what we are going to do here in case of HANA. So thank you very much for watching the video. We will continue from the next part.